Where does Pelicans ownership rank? What about the team facilities? In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why an NFL survey sheds light on the state of the Pelicans as a franchise. It's a Thursday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on this Thursday, a game day for your New Orleans Pelicans. They're back in the Smoothie King Center tonight, taking on the Houston Rockets. We'll, of course, talk about this game in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. I actually think this game will be pretty interesting overall. But in today's show, I want to look at the NFL report cards. Wait, this is Locked On Pelicans, not Locked On Saints, right? Why are we talking about that? Well, they share a lot of the same facilities and invest in both teams in a similar way. So if the Saints are grading out well or poorly, that should be kind of similar to the New Orleans Pelicans. And I'll shed light on what was said in the NFL report cards and kind of the methodology behind it, because I find that really interesting. And then in the next segment, we're getting into why this matters. And it's actually looking better for the Pelicans than maybe you think. And then we'll take a look at Jordan Hawkins in the third part of today's show. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. So let's get into this. The third annual NFL Players Association team report cards here. I find this really interesting because, well, the Saints and Pelicans share a lot of the same facilities, or at least are kind of investing in both of them at the same level. So something said about the Saints should be somewhat representative of what's going on with the New Orleans Pelicans. And honestly, the Saints graded out pretty well overall, and I think it makes the Pelicans look kind of good. And this is an important thing to realize because there's a big impact on the Pelicans from this and kind of the state of the franchise, which we'll get into next. So quick note on this here is this is the third year the NFL Players Association has done this. They get about a 77 response rate across the league. You know, almost 1,700 total players completed the survey. If you divide that by 32, it's almost like 53 players per team basically respond to this. So it really does give you a pretty strong, idea of what the players' experience is. So the Saints report card graded them out as 12 out of 32. So they're in the top third right there. And I think that's a pretty accurate spot and a place for them to be in. The Saints ranked 12th, scoring above average in most facility and staff-related categories. The one lowest rated area is already had improvements done to it, and we'll get into that in a second here. And when you look at the biggest areas of concern, some of these don't really apply to New Orleans here. So I want to get into a couple of these. Let's go just kind of by category here. Treatment of families graded out as 22nd out of 32 teams. That's a C rank. It's not the best. Now, it's a little bit different for New Orleans, for the Pelicans, where you can be more attentive to the players here as opposed to having your large roster for the Saints. And you have someone like Swin Cash that's there to deal with a lot of that as well, kind of doing a little bit of everything. So I'm not overly worried about this, but it was worse under the Dell Demps era where they did not treat families well at all. Now I think it's overall better, but not perfect. I'd put the Pelicans probably right in the middle of the league when it comes to this. The next one I find one of the more interesting ones here. Food dining area. The Pelicans ranked 31 out of 32, a D-. It's really worth noting that the new cafeteria was being built during the Saints season. It's in place now. The expectation is that this score will improve next season once the players are able to experience it. The Pelicans and Saints share the same cafeteria, pretty much. So With that being built and better and hiring new chefs, which they've done, this is only going to get better. So if the Saints are ranking 12th out of 32, this is really holding them back. This will take a significant jump better next season. Nutritionist, dietitian, 12 out of 32. Pelicans have their own staff. I don't know if we want to read too much into this, but assuming they're all at the same kind of level, that's actually pretty good overall. Locker rooms. This is where things get a little bit different here. The Saints are 9th out of 32 teams. Pal's locker rooms in the arena are not great, given that the arena is kind of older. And per the old Christian Clark article from last season about them playing in Birmingham, they were kind of saying that locker room is nicer than what's at the Smoothie King Center. But the locker rooms at the facility have just been renovated and upgraded a lot. Overall, that is a good thing for New Orleans. So I don't think they're as good as, ninth, basically in the top third, but they're about the middle of the pack. The training room is arguably one of the more important ones. The Saints rank 10th out of 32. This was just upgraded recently-ish for the Saints, and the Pelicans upgraded their facility as well. So the team is investing money in these areas for the Pelicans. Their weight room was basically completely redone recently here. And given that that's an area that the team uses, almost more than anything else, that's what you want. The Pelicans have a pretty good facility in that. The training staff, not quite the same because they don't use the same people, but that has gotten better for New Orleans. Saints ranked 10th out of 32. Okay, that's a good thing here. The weight room is their 13th out of 32, similar to like New Orleans. Training rooms where they get all the treatment and everything with all the facilities and stuff like that too. Strength coaches are 10 out of 32. That's going to be applicable enough to the Pelicans here. But where it gets kind of interesting are the next two that I want to talk about here. We're going to spend a few more minutes on these. Team travel. The Saints are 5th out of 32 teams when it comes to travel. You're on planes a lot, particularly in the NBA level. They have about the equivalent type of planes when it comes to it. This is a good thing for both franchises. So team travel giving them an A, 5th out of 32, says some of this infrastructure is pretty good for New Orleans, and it's not like, I think it was the Patriots team plane still has like ashtrays is how old it is. The team has upgraded this, has invested in this to make these players as comfortable as possible. And so overall, again, that's going to translate to the Pelicans as well. Ownership, big one, right? Ownership is ranked 10th out of 32 NFL teams. That gives them an A. And the reasons they list are kind of interesting. And I don't want this to look like I'm only defending Gail Benson or things, but owner Gail Benson is Benson's average rating for perceived willingness to invest in the facilities is 9.31 out of 10 from Saints players, ranking 8 out of 32 owners in the league. The players feel that Benson significantly contributes to a positive team culture, a rank of 12 out of 32. And the players feel that Benson is extremely committed to building a competitive team. That's a rank of 15 out of 32. Honestly, that puts her kind of right in the middle of the pack, in my opinion. Is she the best owner, in the NFL? No. Is she the worst? Absolutely not. That's the same exact thing for the New Orleans Pelicans in the NBA. They're spending money on the upgrades. David Griffin wanted some upgrades for the facility, wanted to hire more people. She gave them the checkbook to do that. If anything, Gail Benson's, biggest issue when it comes to running the teams is maybe trusting certain people a little too much. I'm not a Mickey Loomis fan whatsoever. You could say there's maybe a longer leash for David Griffin than there should have been. That's a valid thing. That's really the main faults when it comes to that. But they want to invest. There's no reason for this team to pay the luxury tax right now. There's reasons to think they might, if they have a competitive team and can prove it. But overall, it shows that ownership is not that bad. It's the people in charge making the decisions that are struggling, and maybe ownership needs to look at them a little bit more. One thing that also held the Saints back here in this survey is head coach. 29 out of 32, but this was about Dennis Allen, who was fired. Look, you could maybe argue it's the same thing here with the Pelicans and all of that, but I'm not going to look at that because that's where it's not a shared thing. That's not the same head coach for the Pelicans and Saints, right? We want to look at the areas that are kind of shared or have overlap, ownership, some of the facilities, the dining, cafeteria room, and all of that. All of that grades out pretty well for both of these franchises. So when you think about this team and it's like, is it hopeless? Is it never going to get better? Are they just a laughing stock? The survey of the players say otherwise. And I think that's a really important thing. So here's why this matters. The infrastructure is in place, to me, is what this says. And I want to get into that in the next segment of, cool, if the infrastructure is in place, what you need. How do you elevate this a little bit more and get back to winning ways? We're going to talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. Who's your support system? We all need people to lean on, whether it's friends, family, mentors, or professionals, and even the strongest leaders and athletes know that asking for help makes them better. And therapy is one of the best ways to build a strong support system. It's not just for tough times. It helps with setting boundaries, developing coping skills, and becoming the best version of yourself. So therapy isn't just about crisis moments. It's a tool for self-improvement, stress management, and navigating life's challenges. Look, life doesn't come with an instruction manual. Sometimes just getting some help to work through some things is really, really useful. And BetterHelp is fully online, making it easier than ever to connect with a licensed therapist from anywhere. And you can find the right fit and switch anytime at no extra cost. So build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything. One day I will stop coughing. Everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans newsletter in your inbox every single day. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com and start your day with the all new free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Really easy, and it's really a great way to support the show. We don't ask for super chats. We don't nickel and dime you. We don't ask you to pay for anything. It's just free every single day. If you want to support the channel in some way, we're not going to ask for money. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast, and please sign up for the newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. So we just went over the NFLPA team report cards, and frankly, the Saints grade out better and assume Kellen Moore is good, or at least not Dennis Allen, which shouldn't be hard to do. They're going to probably come out better than 12 out of 32 next year, probably going to crack the top 10 because the cafeteria is upgraded, which is where the Pelicans also eat, and the head coach is going to be different. So this team is going to look, the Saints are going to look even better. But we're not Locked On Saints. That's Ross Jackson. I'll tell you to listen to him coming up here in a couple of minutes. What does this mean for the Pelicans? So here's why this matters. The infrastructure is in place for this team. Say what you want about David Griffin, but this is one thing that he has done a very, very good job about. When the Bensons bought the team, they immediately built a new practice facilities back in 2012, 2013, 14, somewhere in that range. I forget the exact year. They built a new practice facility where the Saints were so that the team was no longer practicing in the frickin' Ilario Center over in West Wego. When the circus came to town and was performing in the Ilario Center, the Pelicans would get booted out, or the then Hornets would get booted out so that the circus could be there. The NBA team couldn't practice in their kind of community facility because the circus was in town. They were being made rooms. Think about that for a second. At the state of what this franchise used to be. A lot of y'all maybe weren't following back then. It was bizarre under George Shinn previous ownership here. And the Bensons, have invested in this team, built a new facility to do that. When David Griffin stepped in back in 2018, I think it was, he wanted to upgrade the facility even more. So about 5 years after they built it, it underwent about a $10 million renovation, adding more. And then this past off season, knowing that things were getting built for the Saints, David Griffin demanded equality for the Pelicans. This is the story that I've been told about this. When they were doing some renovations to the Saints facility a couple of years ago too, they offered David Griffin, do you want some upgraded facilities too? We'll do that. And basically they're going to try and kind of lowball the Pelicans and go cheap on the Pelicans. And, David Griffin said, how much are the renovations for the Saints facility? And they're $10 million. Like, cool, I'll come back with $10 million worth of plans, and just walked out and went and did it. And basically was no, if you give them $10 million, you're giving the Pelicans $10 million as well. For all of his faults, he is trying to modernize kind of the approach that ownership has taken here. And I do think that is an important thing. And we'll get more into that kind of with the decision making in a second here. But it's almost like the definition of like leave something better than where you found it, at least in terms of the basic infrastructure. That's arguably more important than anything else. Players are going to come and go. But if your facilities are good, that is something that truly matters for these players and will attract other ones or keep the ones that you have here happy so they're not trying to demand out or going to kind of like a more modern situation. There's something to be said for that. So let's just say the infrastructure in terms of facilities and all that is in place. That is not holding the team back. In a sense, that means ownership is not necessarily holding the team back. And I don't want to just completely defend Gail Benson with this here, because that's not what I'm trying to do, right? The arena, I think, is an entirely different discussion when it comes to this sort of thing. But ownership is investing. Their issue just might be trusting people a little bit too much and giving people just too long of a leash when maybe a decision needs to be made about their future or direction. Mickey Loomis is kind of the perfect example of this. But David Griffin and Mickey Loomis are not in the similar situations, right? Mickey Loomis, I think it's believed, has some equity in the team, in the Saints, in the Pelicans, whatever it might be. Might be a little bit tougher to push him out there. He's been there since, 2000, 2002, whenever he joined the organization. He's been there for a long time. David Griffin's been here 6 years. It's not even remotely the same thing. So if Gail Benson is not firing David Griffin or others, I don't think it has to do with she just doesn't know what's going on. I think it's Loomis is going to have a longer leash than David Griffin is, and David Griffin has made some tangible improvements to this organization too. But I think they could easily move on from David Griffin here and go in a different direction. I think he would argue, and maybe they look at it this way too, of injuries are what's killed this team. Injuries are what's killed this team more so than anything else, more so than holding on to Brandon Ingram too long, which they did. But injuries, that's the biggest problem when it comes to it. So the infrastructure is in place and not holding the team back. Kind of what is, right? It's the decision-making around some of this. It is the injuries and making sure that you're investing everything you can into that area to stop that. While the team might be middle of the road, not one of the 10 worst run organizations, let's say, in the NBA, should we settle for that? Should we settle for being 15 out of 30, let's say, in the NBA, which is probably about where the Pelicans would grade out, truthfully? And I think the answer to that is no. If you're not a top 10 organization, you need to be putting money into it to be a top 10 organization in terms of these report cards, let's say. The on-court, on-field results are going to kind of come and go depending with injuries and players and other things like that. But should you be doing everything you can to make sure you are running a top-of-the-line organization? And I think you could argue that to the fans, yeah, ownership and others need to be doing that, and they're not exactly. But it's not like this is a dumpster fire of a team, in my opinion, when you look at it in the larger context of things. And again, that survey I do think is really telling. So it comes down to health of players and, coaching and other things. We'll see if there's a coaching change for the Pelicans this offseason. There was a coaching change for the Saints, so they're open to that idea if it's just not the results that they want to be seen. But those are easier things to potentially fix, right? You can fire a head coach and hire another one. You can trade players and bring in new ones. And that, to me, is something that maybe can be done quicker than changing an entire identity kind of way the franchise is run in those things. That can be harder. That takes time. That takes probably a lot more money too in some capacity, but the facilities are there. So you've got that. Now it comes down to building the right team around your players. Easier said than done. Being a GM is hard. That is one thing that, I've really tried to point out to a lot of folks this year is it's just difficult, and the miss rate on a lot of things and screw up rate is pretty high across the league. And you need a lot of luck. I did read an article that maybe we'll do a whole show on the other day of the Dallas Mavericks and how you kind of make your own luck a little bit. The Luka Doncic trade, trading away, bringing in an injured Anthony Davis, having to play Kyrie Irving so many minutes is going to lead to injuries. And so that's you creating bad luck when Luka had been playing more than those guys. And I think that's a really interesting concept that I want to look at here. But overall, I do think it means that if you just get health one year, this team is going to be good because it's not other things holding them back. And maybe that's the point that took me a long-winded way to get to. If it's you needed to draft better, hire someone that drafts better, right? Although I think the Pelicans have done a good job of that. Is it building the right kind of roster through trades and other things? We never really got to find out. It's a big what if with the DeJounte Murray injury and other things to this team that's kind of derailed this season. Maybe we'll get an answer when it comes to it next year. One guy that we want to get an answer on this year is Jordan Hawkins. He's starting to get some pretty key run here over the past couple of games. Let's break down what we're seeing from him, what we want to see going forward, and is he a core piece? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love the live betting feature on FanDuel because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing the Pelicans for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you're never going to be missing your chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. The Pelicans are 6.5-point underdogs against the Houston Rockets. Houston's not played well. They're 2-6 against the spread their last 8 games. It might be worth taking the points on this one, the 6.5 for New Orleans, knowing they might lose by like 4. And knowing that Zion likely is going to keep playing incredible basketball when he's out there on the court. So right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason. Become an everydayer. And if you're an everydayer, one, shout it out in the streets. This happened the other day. And let me know in the comments down below. It was actually a lot of fun seeing just all the people during Mardi Gras out and hearing I'm an everydayer and all the things being shouted out. It was really cool to hear. I appreciate y'all so much. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Saints. Who are they going to draft? The combine's over. Ross Jackson was there, boots on the ground, covering it all for you. Go make Locked On Saints your second listen today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's wrap up the show talking about Jordan Hawkins and his play over the past couple of games here. He put up, 17 points against the Los Angeles Lakers in the loss here, shooting 4 of 10 from 3. He's been getting more run recently, especially now that his back seems to be a little bit better than it was. So since he's kind of healed up a little bit and started to have some better games when it comes to it, how has he been playing for a minute here? The numbers this season aren't great. In 44 games this season, he's averaging 11 points, 2.6 rebounds, 1.2 assists. His field goal percentage is 37.4%. His shooting percentage from 3 is 33.2. He has not been good, is really just the best way to put it, and that's just the reality of the situation. Over the past 17 games, when he's been starting to get more minutes at 24 minutes per game, it's still not a ton better. 11.4 points, 2.8 rebounds, 1.5 assists, about a steal per game, which has been good. But shooting, again, 41% from the field and 35.5% from 3. He needs to kind of prove that he is more than a shooter, and you just haven't really seen that from him. And even during all of this, he hasn't been a particularly great shooter either. And the on-off numbers bear this out. He's played, 1,000 minutes for the team this season. They're 4.6 points per possession, they're 4.6 points per 100 possessions. Worse with him on the court. So he has a negative net rating of 4.6 essentially during this time. When you look at it, he should be an offensive player, right? You would imagine that the reason it's so bad is, the defense isn't good. The offense is definitely there. But we just went over the numbers. The offense hasn't been there either. The Pelicans offense is 5 points worse when he's out there on the court than when he's on the bench. That isn't good, but that can be a little bit misleading of, is he playing with bench guys, which has not been a strength for New Orleans this season. So I checked the lineup data with Jordan Hawkins and Zion Williamson on the court. You know, if he's playing with Zion, does it work? Does he drag that down? Does he not? And the answer is a little bit of a mixed bag. Overall, in 583 possessions with Zion Williamson, there is a positive differential of 3.1. So the offense is a little bit better. The defense is a little bit better too when he's out there on the court. But when you look at him in, say, some of these lineups, it's not encouraging. You know, the lineup that has played the most minutes, there's two. It's a very mixed bag right now. Jose Alvarado, Jordan Hawkins, Javonte Green, Zion Williamson, and Eben Messi had a minus 18.2 net rating. But Jose, Hawkins, Zion, Kelly Olynyk, and Karl Makovich has a almost plus 60 net rating. Limited possessions, like one possession would skew these numbers a little bit, but that can be encouraging. But then you look at him with, you know, guys that you would imagine would be the starters a little bit. And that hadn't been good, right? The lineup of Jose Alvarado, Jordan Hawkins, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and Eben Messi, 32 possessions, minus 27 and a half. There was one lineup, there it is, that I wanted to find that I also think is really telling. CJ McCollum, Jordan Hawkins, Trey Murphy, Zion, and Messi is minus 40.8. The offense is garbage. Now, maybe that has to do with defense and rebounding. That's going to factor into it too. But you get what I'm saying, that while he has a positive net rating with Zion, it is still, sorry, I'm still coughing. It is still a little bit of a mixed bag of him trying to kind of figure out where he fits in with this team and the team trying to figure out where he fits in. If you're a one-dimensional player that is a three-point shooter and you're not shooting above 40% from three, it's not overall a good thing and really not what you want. And I think that's what you're coming in to see. You know, Jordan Hawkins needs to play these minutes with Zion going forward, and we need to see that be just really good, right? Zion is a plus 16 on the season. This is factoring in the Lakers game from the other night. That's what the net rating is with Zion, plus 16. So for it to only be a plus 3 with Jordan Hawkins, that's mildly concerning. There's a pretty significant difference there. That needs to be closer to like plus 10 maybe. But this basically says Jordan Hawkins is very much kind of an end of bench guy with the way that he's been playing. If his three-point shot starts falling and he's doing it in volume, that's a bit of a different story. And look, over the past 17 games, he's shooting slightly better from three, 35.5% than he is on the season at 33%. But I wouldn't call 35.5% a particularly good number for him this year. You know, last year, his rookie year was 36.6%. That's not a particularly encouraging number, in my opinion, if he were to go out and play well. It's leading to not great efficiency, right? This is someone who is scoring 10.9 points on 10 shot attempts. Like, that ain't it. That three ball's basically got to fall, and it's got to fall at a very, very high rate, given the limitations of Hawkins as a player. You know, the final however many games, it's going to be on him to be consistent with that. He's getting open looks with Zion Williamson out there. But if he wants to be a core piece going forward and not be included in a trade or something like that in the future, or be a bit of a wasted draft pick for New Orleans, that shot's got to fall. And hopefully he's going to start doing that pretty soon. What do you think about Hawkins? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the game.